Welcome to Colonie TV, the governmental educational channel for the town of Colonie.
Welcome to Getting to Know You. My name is Joe Nash. Today we're going to be talking about the sport of thoroughbred horse racing with Neal Benoit. He has a website called gettingoutofthedate.com. It'll be on the screen here. So welcome, Neal.
Thank you.
And before we start, I'm going to say Neal's going to be at the library for 3 programs. They sort of coincide with the Triple Crown. He's going to be doing a program on thoroughbred horse racing, all kinds of things, handicapping, what to look for, why the Triple Crown races, what they are. If the fields are announced by the days we do the programs, we may handicap those 3 races. He's going to be here Monday, April 28th, 7 p.m. And he's also going to be here Monday, May 12th, and Thursday, June 5th. So welcome, Neal. Your website's about a year old. Mm-hmm. So why don't you tell us how the website started? You have a little bit of a computer background, and we've already been talking before we started. You have a love of thoroughbred horse racing, so tell us how this all got started.
Well, it's probably more than a love. It's definitely a passion. In fact, my wife has strict instructions that when I pass away, my ashes are to end up in Saratoga racetrack somehow, some way, shape, or form. So they're working on those details. I've been a fan of horse racing since I was a teenager. I got hooked when Affirmed and Aladar raced in the Triple Crown, and they ran first and second in every leg of the Triple Crown.
Okay.
And a lot of people you find that are my age got hooked at the same time. My background outside of horse racing is computer related. I was a programmer and still am. Still have a business where I do some programming work. So I have a computer aptitude. And just decided a little over a year ago to try to put the 2 together and to give something back to a sport that's given me so much. I mean, I just enjoy it immensely. I didn't know anything about creating a website because my programming's in mainframes. But I read a few books, started playing around, got some software that allowed me to do a blog, and
well, I have to tell people watching, be on the screen, it's a really good website. It's got all kinds of stuff. It's got stories, anecdotes, it's got some little videos that you use as an example. Mm-hmm. You have all kinds of categories, and you've written many of your articles. You've interviewed people, very famous people. You're going to have an interview with Gary Stevens coming up on the website. And you actually go to tracks all over the country.
The only place I haven't been is the West Coast.
Okay.
But that's on my goal this year.
Well, one thing and you have the mission statement I was reading of your website. Mm-hmm. Why don't we mention this before we start? Because horse racing, it isn't just about betting. It's a sport like many other spectator sports. Tell us about the sport of thoroughbred horse. How does that compare, or how do you compare it to other major?
There's athletes in this sport just like anything else. I mean, the chief athlete is the horse. Second to that would be the jockey. But then the trainers, they're like a head coach. Mm-hmm. So Todd Pletcher, for example, he would equate to, say, Bill Belichick for the Patriots. He's the one that's running the show. He has people working for him. He has assistant trainers, just like Bill Belichick has assistant coaches. So there's a hierarchy that goes into this, all the way down to the people that actually take care of the horses. So it is truly a sport. It just happens to be a sport where there is gaming and gambling based upon it. But I think you could argue some of those other sports like football and baseball also have a certain element to that side of it too. But unfortunately, I think in some ways it does cloud things a little bit because there is that aspect to it. But for me personally, the betting is just part of it. People are always amazed when I tell them I can go to a racetrack like a Saratoga, spend the entire day there and have fun and bet on 2 or 3 races.
No, I think we both know a lot of people who go to the track, either bet minimally or don't even bet, but they have a great time.
Yeah.
Well, you say you've been doing this for 35 years before you started the website. So what is it, you mentioned a few things, what is it you particularly like about both horse racing and handicapping that has made you not only do it for 35 years, but now you're starting up this whole new...
All right, well, let's start with handicapping. For me, looking at a race is like trying to solve a puzzle. It's trying to figure out, there's clues out there. And I actually wrote an article a few months back where I contrasted two general types of horse players or handicappers. I put them into a category of crossword puzzle or jumble. You know, the jumbles one.
Oh, yeah.
Crossword is somebody who likes to just do everything, look at everything, solve the whole thing before they're not done until it's all looked at. A jumbo player might, look at the clue in advance. They might do parts of it or look for certain angles. I would say I'm a crossword player. I would say my wife is a jumbo player.
Okay.
It's a different attitude. It's just a different way of looking at it. Sometimes you're trying to just handicap something quickly. But what I've found is I have been associated with people of numerous different styles and approaches that are all successful in their own way. I mean, I know some people that don't even look at the races before they go to the racetrack. They walk in, pick the racing form up as they're going in the door, and make their bets as the day goes on. I know other people that don't even use the racing form. They pretty much focus on the physicality of the horse in the paddock. And I've seen people succeed in all varieties. I'm a hybrid of all of those.
Okay. Well, I know there's some people, there's a lot of handicappers, some emphasize other things or they give more weight to others. I mean, some of the categories, there's class, distance, speed, surface, trainer. Some people just like to bet the jockey.
Yeah.
Do you emphasize some factors more than others, or
all the above? I do. I will say this: if I specialize on anything, I would say I'm what I referred to in my articles as a visual handicapper. What I mean by that is I spend a lot of time looking at replays. I will look back and see a horse's last 1, 2, sometimes 3 races and try to pick up on their progression and see how they're moving. And I've always been of that type, but I'm getting better at it.
Oh, okay.
And in fact, one of the really fun things I got to do last summer is spend an afternoon with Maggie Wolfendale in the paddock at Saratoga. She's the paddock analyst for NYRA. She has a incredible background in horses. Her dad was a trainer, 3rd generation in horses. She started to get me to realize the importance of sizing horses up before they go on the track.
I mean,
see how they look today.
actually sort of eyeballing them kind of.
Absolutely. See how they look today. And she does a great job of keeping notes about how they look today versus how they looked when she saw them 3 months ago.
And does she mention that when she does?
She does. She does a terrific job.
Now,
she brings something to the races that I don't think anybody else does.
Now, you mentioned that there's all these different kinds of handicappers. Some emphasize this or that or the other. Is there a point where there's almost too much information, or is that?
I think so, and that's where I try to say horse racing is a complicated game, but it doesn't have to be complicated to play it. You can kind of focus on a few things, and let me give you a quick contrast here to myself versus my wife. I taught my wife how to handicap when we first met 30 years ago. And I talk about that in one of my articles because I did that for self-preservation, so that way I wasn't in a situation where, oh, who do you like? What are you going to bet on? All that, and I didn't want to go down that path. So I taught her, and for several years she would still ask me, what do you think? Now we go to the racetrack, and she doesn't not only ask, she doesn't care. She's got her own style and the way she does things, but she's got different things she's looking for in a race, different angles, if you will. All right, she loves certain things that she plays. She loves to see when a horse showed early speed off from a layoff. That a horse has been off for a few months, comes back, gets out. Maybe they tire late, but they run early. And she'll highlight those. She will not study the racing form like I do for 3 or 4 hours before going to the racetrack.
Right, so she likes that one. That's one of her big
That's
factors.
one of her things.
That's a big factor for her.
That's a big factor, and she's got that. But then part 2 of her, she does a phenomenal job at analyzing the horses before the race. Just gut instinct of the horse is on its toes, ears pricked, looks good today. Some of the same kind of stuff Maggie does.
Okay. And there's articles on your website on a lot of these.
Yes, there is.
So the website, how can your website, there's a big thing for I would say your website's for both novices and for experienced horse players. How can your website help both?
Well, what started when I began the website April 1st, 2013, I called it Getting Out of the Gate, a Beginner's Guide to Horse Racing. And that was my intent. It was based upon seminars and things that I had done in the past. I quickly realized that I needed to have somewhere for people to go. That they might be beginners when they start, or they might be coming into this when they're more than a beginner. So what I did is about 6 months ago, back in the fall, I decided to take every single article that I had written and categorize it from easiest down to most difficult. Now if you look at my website, on the top there's a section that says Get Started. If you hit the Get Started and drop it down, it breaks things up into Introduction, Racing 101, 201, 301, 401. Then there's a Wagering 101, 201. So that way people can kind of look, and what I do is I give like a summary. There's a page that comes up with a summary of all the articles. So you can kind of look and say, oh, well, I already know about that particular thing. Let me look at, jump to the next thing. So somebody coming into the website brand new has the ability now to kind of jump in.
Well, I was going to say one thing about the website. There's you do have these little subcategories, and it's pretty interesting. Like under handicapping, there's like 50 articles, but they're broken down, and then the number of articles that are there: age, class, distance, examples, figures, form, pace, results charts, surface trainer, and trips. Under wagering, the subheadings, like you said, basics, intra-race, multi-race, tails. There's some good stories in here.
Yes, you're trying to do more and more of that.
Excellent writer. Tournaments, welcome. You have a section called People, where you've actually interviewed a lot of people.
Well, and I think to answer the other part of your question was, how do I handle the fact that I maybe have beginners plus people more experienced? The stories, the people, all those kind of things, the travels that I include, those can apply to anybody at any level. So that's part of, I think, the entertainment side of the website, is that regardless if you're a beginner. I actually had somebody the other day tell me that they read my website religiously, and I said, well, and it's a local person, he says, but I don't go to the racetrack. I said, we don't go to the racetrack? He goes, no, I just found your stories really interesting, because I love to read about the people and the places that you've visited. And
well, it seems like you do enjoy, besides handicapping, and you do enjoy writing too.
I do.
And you've been to, except you mentioned the West, many tracks, and you've got some great stories. I mentioned the Gary Stevens articles coming up, but under people, who are some of the other people you've interviewed and talked to?
Recently, I've had some great interviews. When I went to Florida for 2 months. I was there in December and January, and didn't know what to expect. Just knew that I wanted the opportunity to meet more people in the business. And actually, Maggie Wolfendale opened some doors for me. She contacted a few people I was interested in that had caught my attention at Saratoga, and I knew were in Florida. And she, either emailed or made a contact for me, so that when I contacted him, it wasn't completely out of the blue. And started out with head trainer Christophe Clement. And I visited him at Payson Park. He gave us a tour. He went through his whole process that he does. We spent several hours with him, my wife and I. He was fantastic. And he's one of the first, he's not the first trainer, but he's one of the first trainers that I did. And during the conversation, I said to him, I've met some head trainers. I'd like to meet an assistant trainer to see what the difference is. He says, well, the best one in the business is Buzzy Tenney. Buzzy Tenney is the assistant to Shug McGahee, who won the Kentucky Derby last year. He goes, would you like his cell phone? I said, well, I suppose, but it'd be nice if you let him know ahead of time. But he goes, well, here's his cell phone. He didn't actually call him ahead of time, and I called him and told him that Christophe had recommended. He's like, oh, absolutely, come down. And he sat down with me at the barn one day for a couple hours, and we talked about how the Derby changed or didn't change his life. Oh, and in fact, he told a great story about how it really hasn't changed his life that much. But that was unbelievable. Here I am sitting there with a guy who won the Kentucky Derby last year, and talking about his whole experience. So, and then probably continuing on, there's several trainers. I met Dylan Davis. Dylan Davis is an apprentice jockey whose dad, Robbie Davis, was one of the big riders in the New York circuit for years. For 2 decades, Robbie Davis was one of the top jockeys.
I know that's a...
Well, Dylan's a young guy who's just starting out. And what was great is talking to Dylan as a young guy, I got a whole different perspective than, say, Gary Stevens, who's 50 years old and is actually in the midst of a comeback. So it was a whole different perspective from him.
So your website, I should tell people, it isn't just about betting and handicapping.
No, absolutely
There's really wonderful stories on here, not just with Neal's interviews, but you have some just going to the track kind of stories that are, some of them are, the one about Flaubert, see, I'm going to say it, so people are going to have to go read this, but there's a story on the side there, Deep Sixed by the Pick Six. So it's a little short story, but
yeah,
it's like it's a classic.
I have to confess too, that's actually not my own experience. That was a friend of mine who's an avid horse player, who remains anonymous because a lot of horse players don't like to divulge their identity. So we've created a fictitious name for him called Vince.
Oh, okay.
And that's actually Vince's story. I mean, I edited it and worked with him on getting the actual story down.
Okay.
But Vince is full of stories.
Well,
there's another story on Vince too about a season saver ticket where he saved his entire Saratoga season on the last day, on the last 4 races of the meet by hitting a pick 4.
Well, so that name said Vince the Volcano. That seemed like a real name. Well, one thing you mentioned before we started, one of the reasons you started your website to educate the horse player, you were telling me you feel that horse racing in general, which encompasses everything, the companies involved, whatever the word is, you said that they don't seem to do enough to educate the public in a way. How?
That's my opinion. I think for whatever reason, I don't know why, they seem to almost deny that the game is a complicated game. I don't know. Maybe they're afraid of scaring people away. I'm not sure what the mentality is, but it doesn't seem like there's a lot of education. If you go to the racetrack and you've never been, and you're looking for somehow trying to learn about how the sport operates, you're going to have a hard time. And in fact, the people that are typically on air, they presume that you already know a certain amount. And if you listen to their jargon and how they talk, you're going to be lucky if you pick up 10 or 20% of what they say. With a few exceptions, and we can talk about those if you want.
Oh, sure. Yeah,
but most of them are just presuming that you know what's going on. And when they talk about golden rails and all this different terminology, dropping a horse in for a tag, if you're a new person, you have no idea what they're talking about.
Well, it seems like sometimes when you on the OTB channel or something, or whatever, sometimes I'll have a program on something, but it's sort of pretty rudimentary.
Right. And I wanted to do something where I could bring, an organized process to it. Where we start kind of at the beginning and we carry our way through all these different things. And then again, you can kind of pick and choose.
Okay.
Like we were saying earlier, some people maybe don't pay a lot of attention to class. Maybe they focus more on time and speed figures and things like that. But my approach on the website is to kind of let you have a little bit of everything and show you some real examples where on the website I take the racing form and I'll show actual marks, or I'll show my racing form from that day to point out, something like distance.
Like what you highlighted for that race.
Right, exactly.
And then the good thing about Neal's website, he does have these little diagrams. He has things where you highlight, and then a lot of times you'll show that race. You have a little clip of the race, so it's like a full horse racing educational experience.
Oh, YouTube is fantastic. One of the posts that I did talked about the different configurations of racetracks. They're very unique. I mean, people might think
they're not all the same.
They're not even close to the same. They're not the same distance, same configuration. They have chutes in some places.
Like baseball parks.
Absolutely. And that's one of the really fun things that I like is when you go to these tracks, you get an appreciation for how unique they are.
Okay.
And in fact, if you want to talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, maybe you could tell us some of your favorite racetracks.
I absolutely. In fact, one of the ones, and I'll mention it first, and then we'll kind of circle back around. I've always wanted to go see Kentucky Downs. Very few people have ever even heard of Kentucky Downs. It's a small track down in southern Kentucky, almost right on the Tennessee border. It is the only European-style track in North America.
They go...
No, it's not so much the direction, it's the configuration.
Oh.
It's not an oval. not only is it not an oval, it's irregularly shaped. It has undulations. It rises, it dips, it turns, and you come up the stretch, it rises again. It's based upon the European style of racing, which is kind of like carved out of a field.
Okay.
And I'd always wanted to go there, but they only have 5 days of racing in September.
That's
the entire year.
Oh, geez.
5 days. And I wanted to see that. What an experience. It almost took me back in time to where I envisioned racing was maybe 150 years ago. People sitting in chairs out in, like in a pasture or field, if you will. And it was truly like just like a fair kind of atmosphere.
How would you handicap that? Do they have?
That's a challenge. Well, you're still looking at the same information from the races they were in before because they didn't race at Kentucky Downs.
Oh, okay, but were they on those kind of tracks or regular tracks? Oh,
they're run on the tracks here. And it's entirely grass, by the way. There's no dirt there. It's just, and if you go to my website and you look at my travels, if you look on the Kentucky Downs, I have a picture, and maybe we can pull some of that up as an example of what it looks like.
So, and do I dare ask, how did you do that day? Did you make any wagers?
I actually did pretty well. I actually did okay, yeah. And boy, oh boy, did that turn out to be beneficial because some stories have come out of that.
Oh, okay.
One I'm not even going to divulge yet because it's a pretty cool story, and it involves the track announcer that day. It involves Gary Stevens, who happened to come into town to ride a horse that day. It involves the way the track announcer called the race, and the end result was Gary Stevens getting the ride on Mucho Macho Man, who won the Classic. It's all interlinked in a story.
And this story will be upcoming on your...
Probably in less than a month.
Okay.
I'm still working out. Gary Stevens helped me with some of the details. And
you're piquing people's interest.
Oh, it was just fun to actually have been there on the day that this all started.
It led to him getting that riding Mucho.
Directly. His ride that day at Kentucky Downs directly led to him getting the mount. Okay. So I got to save that story.
So how does, your local guy, how does Saratoga compare with other racetracks you visited? I know it's in our backyard, but how does that compare to other racetracks?
Well, what's funny is for a lot of people and friends and family that don't know anything but Saratoga, they might have this vision that that's the way it is everywhere. It couldn't be further from the truth. The whole atmosphere at Saratoga, where that backyard area and the picnic tables, summertime and the living is easy, it's just perfect. Everything is perfect that sets up. The stars are in a line. The quality of the racing is fantastic. It absolutely spoils you. Because when you try to compare that to other places, sometimes our places don't measure up. But at the same time, I always say, I have been accused of never meeting a racetrack that I didn't like. And I will say this, as much as I love Saratoga, and it will always be my favorite, I grew up 30 minutes away from there, other tracks have their own charm as well. They have different things. Gulfstream Park, I think, is pretty cool. It's a wide open atmosphere. There's no admission. You can come and go as you please. And behind the track, they've built up this whole Gulfstream Park village that has shops, restaurants, stores. On the front side of the track, they turn it, it's almost like you're at a beach. There's tiki huts and sand and a big tiki stadium that you can go sit in. And it just has a feeling almost like you're at a day at the beach, but with the horses running there as well.
And Gulfstream is in
Gulfstream is in Hollandale, which is just north of Miami.
Oh, okay.
So they're different, but Keeneland's different too. Keeneland's got a whole different.
They're all again, like baseball parks or even
absolutely,
they're all different.
They really are.
Why don't we talk about, you're going to be at the library 3 times, each of the times in the week preceding the Triple Crown. Monday, April 28th, 7 p.m. Monday, May 12th, 7 p.m. and Thursday, June 5th. So why don't you talk about, because this show is going to be on way before all these, what are some of the things you may be offering to people? You're going to emphasize each of the 3 races, but...
Yeah, what we'll try to do, the first 2 legs, I think the way the timing worked out, it's going to be early in the week.
They're both on Mondays previous, so is the field usually announced by that Monday?
I'll have a pretty good idea. Certainly the Kentucky Derby, I'll have a pretty good idea. There'll be 20 horses, and we'll have a pretty good idea who they are. I may or may not have an advanced version of the racing form at that point, but I'll at least know who the horses are. For that one, we'll probably focus more on maybe the history of it and some of the things to think about when you're looking at the Kentucky Derby, because the Derby is very unique in that it's the first time horses of that age have ever been asked to go that distance, which is 1.25 miles. They've never up to that point. The closest any of them have been is probably 1.125 miles.
Okay.
So it's a whole new challenge for them. And in fact, the funny thing is the Kentucky Derby, the most famous race that there is, from a horse player standpoint, is the worst. It's the hardest. I shouldn't say the worst. The hardest to handicap and the hardest to bet. There's so many factors going on.
It's usually a very large field too.
Almost always 20 horses now. Yeah, so it's a tough race, but it's absolutely fun. It's the peak of the year as far as interest in the sport. So we'll definitely focus on each leg. The Belmont Stakes we'll probably be able to get into more specifics because we're doing that on a Thursday.
Okay.
And I'll almost certainly have already gotten the past performances from the Racing Forum, looked at a few things, so we can probably get into a few things. What I might do for both is, knowing the horses, I can pull up some replays of some previous races, and we'll talk a little bit about.
So you can give some examples of some of your style of handicapping and what
I'm looking for, what I will be looking for when I handicap the race. So I would definitely say we'll focus on that. We will also look at the website. I'll pull that up and I'll show people some tricks about how to get around, just like we talked about with the Get Started, and you can look here to see beginner level and show people how you can navigate and make your way around. I also figured what I'd probably do is pick an article or two or a topic or two from each category. So say Racing 101. Hit a couple beginner things. Racing 201, hit a couple of things out of that. That way I'll try to address the different skill levels of people that are in the audience.
I know you were telling me before we started, when you do these programs, you never know if 50 people come, you may have someone who may not even know what a quinella is, and you may have someone who won the pick six. I don't know, who knows?
Absolutely, yeah. That's one of the challenges. I don't really know going into it what I'm going to get. But I think by doing it this way, hopefully I'll be able to address a little bit of everything, but also build in some stories. And like I said before, stories, travels, people, those are all things that apply to anyone.
One thing I know about horse players, they do love to tell stories.
Absolutely.
And when you have these things, I'm sure you get a lot of, you could probably have a whole website of just stories about horse.
And I've even thought about that because I think about what I really enjoy, and it's sitting down and talking to people and learning. And one of the people I didn't mention, I would be remiss without going back and mentioning this person, is when my favorite interview by far when I was in Florida was T.C. Stevens.
Okay.
T.C. Stevens is Gary Stevens' son. And it was just a strange set of circumstances that led me to T.C. I'd actually made arrangements to talk to Gary first, but we couldn't connect when he was in Florida and had to put it off. In the meantime, I find out his son is training in Florida. So when I talked to Gary's wife, I asked, do you think he'd be willing to talk to me? Young guy, just started out last year. Next thing I know, I get a text from him. He says, yeah, come on down to the barn tomorrow. The guy was fascinating. You want to talk about stories? Wow.
And
this kid started out last year. He's not really a kid. I don't know for sure, but I think he's about 30. He started out last year, day 2 of his career as a head trainer. He gets thrown off a horse and breaks his leg. All right? And he said, what a super attitude, this guy. He says, it's fitting. He goes, it's the way this business is. There's so many ups and downs that day 2 he's thrown off. Well, fast forward, 6 months later, he wins his very first race of his career at Churchill Downs with the same horse that threw him off at odds of 50-1. The horse paid over $100 for his first win.
Now that sounds like a fictional horse racing story.
If you didn't know it, you wouldn't believe it. It's the absolute truth. But I learned so much from TC. And I've actually said to my kids, I've asked both of them to read this article because his philosophies about dealing with the ups and downs of the business. And that's one of the things that people that are front side, the fans, even the most experienced fans, which I am, do not have an appreciation for how much those guys go through back there. There is a lot more disappointment and heartache than there is
than glory.
And you got to, and TC said, you got to enjoy the highs because they're few and far between.
And then is that story on the web?
That is on
That's
the website.
under people?
If you go to people, if you click
Okay.
on people, and actually on my Get Started, drop it down, it says Meet the People.
Okay.
I have a summary of all the people that I've met so far, and T.C. Stevens
Okay.
will be on there.
Well, your enthusiasm and love of horse racing has really come through, Neal. We really appreciate it, and we're looking forward to seeing you at the library. You're going to be here, I'll mention it one more time, Monday, April 28th, Monday, May 12th, Thursday, June 5th, 7 p.m. Neal's going to talk about his website, talk about handicapping, tell some stories, and we hope to see you there. So anything you want to say before we finish here?
Let me think here. Let me think about some of the things going into it. We talked about the novices. Let me just tell you a story. Want to hear my
Okay,
story?
yes. Well,
Stories?
I should say we've been talking about storytelling a lot here. So
Yeah, I'll
why
tell you a
don't you
story.
finish with a story?
I
here?
call this my genius or idiot story. All right? And this is when I think back, there's definitely certain days that you just remember more than others. And that Flowbird story was a good example. My buddy, he remembers that one. And that one didn't have a happy ending, as where this one did. August 8th, 2009, and I can remember it so well because it was my son's 18th birthday. And traditional with my son, who's a horse racing fan, as you can understand, we spent the day at the racetrack. Well, that particular day, he likes to get a picnic table up at the top of the stretch, and Deb and I, my wife, we went up in the morning and we set it all up for him. And, you know, it wasn't my typical day. Usually I'd be studying the races, and I don't mean to make excuses, but it wasn't my typical day. So we got everything all set up, and his buddies came, and there was a whole crowd there. And, of course, they're asking me, who do you like, who do you like, all day long. For 9 races, I give them nothing
And
but garbage.
this is your son's friends all
My
know
sons.
you're
Oh, they know.
a horse player for 35.
Oh, absolutely.
And you couldn't give them any tips?
Nothing. It was all just terrible. Nothing. No winners, nothing. And one of my closest friends was with us too, an elderly gentleman that we call Poppy. He's like an adopted grandfather. We get to the very last race of the day, and Poppy says to me, all right, who do you got? And I had my sheet. Typically, I'll have a sheet laying out my horses that I like from top to bottom. Top of my list, I got a horse called Tutti Va Bene. He looks at the horse, the board, and he says, that's 19-1. I said, listen, Poppy, either I'm a genius or an idiot. And his response was, you're an idiot, but I'm going to bet on it anyways. So he was down to his last, I don't remember, $30 or something. The horse actually went off at 19-1. And all Mike's friends, my son, they all got in on the act.
They were still behind you even after 9
They
races?
hadn't given up. They were all running out of money, with the exception of his one friend, a girlfriend is from high school, and she just wanted to bet her own thing.
Yeah.
She comes into the story a little bit too. She wanted to bet this horse called Montana something because she liked the name Montana, and it was 50-1. She's like, all right, so you bet that. The rest of them are betting Tutti Va Bene. Well, we'll jump to the end. Tutti Va Bene came from 6th place at the top of the stretch and just went by everybody. Wins the race, pays $40. We all bail out. They're all jumping and hooting and hollering. My buddy Poppy makes $500 and some on the last race. and the friend who liked the Montana horse, she's yelling. I'm like, why the heck is she yelling? I look at the board. The horse she bet on finished 2nd. I forgot what it paid to place. I go, what, did you have it across the board? And she goes, no. She goes, I bet it to win, place, and show.
Oh, okay.
And they all just started laughing. And the best part of it all is for 9 races that day, I was an idiot. But on the last race of the day, I was a genius. And you know what? That's what everybody remembers. And that's the beauty of horse racing.
Well, that is a great story. I should just say, I read some of the stories on your webpage. There's tons of stories like that, and a lot of information for learning about the sport of thoroughbred horse racing and handicapping. So, Neal, really been fun having you here, and
I appreciate it.
We'll have you back again. So that is it for getting to know you, and we'll see you next time.